The desert wind blew low and sharp across the red clay, whispering through sagebrush and creaking old fence posts as if the land itself was mourning. Thomas Red Elk tugged his horse to a stop at the ridge, squinting into the sinking sun. The shadows were long now, stretching like reaching fingers across the high desert trail that wound between scattered pines and boulders. It wasn't just the silence that unsettled him. It was the wrong kind of silence. Too still. Too heavy. Even the hawks had fallen quiet. Then he saw her. At first he thought it was a downed animal, maybe a stray goat that had wandered too close to the ridges and fallen. But as his eyes adjusted to the shape, his gut told him different. A bundle of white-stained red lay crumpled beside a mesquite bush just off the trail. His mare huffed as he dismounted and stepped cautiously forward. A flash of hair caught the light black, tangled and caked with dirt. Then a hand fingers curled weakly in the dust, twitching. "Hey," he called, gently crouching. "Can you hear me?" The woman stirred, barely. Her dress, or what was left of it, hung in shreds. Blood streaked across her cheek and neck. One eye was swollen shut. Her lips were split, dried with old blood and dust. And yet her chest still rose and fell, shallow and shaking. Alive. Barely. Thomas slipped the canteen from his saddle, wet his neck scarf, and pressed it gently to her forehead. "You're safe now," he murmured. "Ain't no one gonna hurt you again." Her breath hitched at the contact, her body instinctively trying to pull away, but she didn't have the strength to move. A broken sound escaped her lips, a rasped whisper he could barely make out. "Please, don't let them find me." Who, he asked, but her eyes rolled back and she went still. Thomas didn't waste another second. He wrapped his arms under her knees and shoulders, lifting her carefully. She was all bone and bruises, weightless in his arms. She moaned softly, then winced, her ribs catching painfully with every breath. He mounted with her, carefully setting her across the saddle before him, his arm bracing her against his chest. He leaned close to her ear. "You hang on now. We're going home." The ride back to Red Clay Ranch took nearly an hour, and every step of the horse felt like it rattled her broken body. Thomas rode slower than usual, eyes sweeping the open range around him. He didn't like the idea that someone had left her out here like this, and he didn't think they were far. By the time the ranch house came into view, the sun had dipped behind the peaks, casting a gold-orange hue across the land. Smoke curled gently from the chimney. Auntie Lou was on the porch, arms folded, watching the horizon with sharp eyes that missed nothing. When she saw Thomas approaching, she stepped down the stairs and froze. "Merciful God," she whispered, as Thomas swung down with the woman still in his arms. "Found her on the south trail 2 miles past the Cedar Split," he said, voice tight. "She's bad, Lou." Auntie Lou hurried to open the door. "Bring her inside. I'll get Rosa." The house smelled of juniper pine ash and old cedar floors. Thomas laid the woman down on the spare cot in the back room. Lou was already boiling water, her hands steady despite the tension in her shoulders. Within minutes, Rosa Tso came through the back door with her satchel of roots cloth and smoke bundles. "She breathing?" Rosa asked. "Just barely," Thomas said. "Whoever did this, they meant to finish it." "She Apache?" Rosa asked as she leaned close to the woman's face. Thomas shook his head. "Don't know. She's mixed, maybe Mexican or Lipan. Don't look local." Rosa opened one of the woman's eyelids, checked her pulse, then unwrapped the blood-soaked rags clinging to her arms. Her brows drew tight. Her ribs are cracked. Hands show signs of a fight. This wasn't no robbery. She said something before she passed out. Tomas said quietly. Said, "Don't let them find me." Rosa didn't answer right away. Instead, she lit a smudge bundle, whispering under her breath as smoke drifted over the woman's body. "She's got spirit," Rosa murmured. "The kind that don't break easy." Tomas stood at the foot of the bed, hands on his hips, watching the woman as Rosa worked. Her face was battered, but even in that there was strength, a refusal to die. He didn't know her story, but something in his chest already twisted for her. Not pity, something deeper. Recognition, maybe. "She gonna make it?" he asked. Auntie Lou joined Rosa, dabbing the woman's forehead with lavender water. "She's got a fever," Lou said. "Bad one. If it don't break by morning, we'll need the doc from town." Thomas looked at them both. "Then I'll sit up with her." Rosa gave him a look. "You don't need to, I want to." They nodded. Later, after they'd finished cleaning her wounds and bandaging her ribs, Thomas pulled a wooden chair into the corner of the room. He didn't speak, just sat with his rifle leaning against the wall, eyes never leaving her face. Outside, coyotes called to one another in the distance. Inside, she started to stir. She moaned again, sweat beading on her brow, her body twitching beneath the blankets. Her lips parted as if trying to speak. "No. Silas, don't." Thomas leaned forward. "It's all right. You're safe." Her eyes snapped open, one still swollen, the other wild and unfocused. "Where am I?" she croaked. "My ranch," he said. "I found you on the trail. My name's Thomas." She tried to push herself up, but collapsed back, breath shallow. "They'll come for me. They think I'm dead." "Who?" he asked. She looked straight at him, eyes sharp for the first time. "Men who kill for money. Men who don't forget." He didn't flinch. "Then let them come." She studied him a moment, then her head lolled to the side. He stayed by her through the night. Before dawn, she whispered again, this time clearer. "There's a ledger. Hidden. If they find it, they'll kill me for sure." And just like that, the silence was broken, and Thomas understood he hadn't just rescued a stranger. He'd stepped into a storm. If you flinch when kindness touches you, someone taught you to fear love. Lena's eyes snapped open in the early gray light, breath catching in her throat, like she'd surfaced too fast from a deep lake. The room around her was unfamiliar, too still, too warm. She reached for her side and found herself tangled in soft quilts, her ribs tightly wrapped. Panic crept in like a tide. Her body didn't hurt as much as it had, though every breath still throbbed, but it was the stillness that unnerved her most. Quiet meant waiting. Waiting meant danger. The smell of sage and cedar lingered faintly in the air, undercut with a sweetness she couldn't place. Someone had been burning herbs. Her throat was raw, her lips cracked. She turned her head slowly and found a man sitting near the corner, arms crossed, eyes half closed. Her pulse leapt. The bruises on her legs ached, and memory and instinct shoved her mind back to the last time she'd seen a man's shadow in a doorway. She let out a hoarse sound and tried to slide herself backward, but the motion made white-hot pain shoot through her side. She gasped, and the man opened his eyes. "Easy," he said, voice deep, not unkind. "You're safe here." She pressed herself against the bed frame, arm raised like she expected a blow. Her other hand trembled as it clawed for something to throw, but there was nothing within reach but a tin cup on the side table. "I ain't gonna hurt you," the man said again. "Name's Thomas Red Elk. You're at my ranch." Lena didn't respond. Her eyes stayed locked on him, watching his movements. Her heart pounded in her chest, like it wanted to rip out and run. "You were out cold for a day and a half. Found you bleeding on the trail," he added. "We've been tending to you." She tried to speak but coughed instead, her throat too dry to form sound. Tomas stood slowly, keeping his movements deliberate, and picked up the cup. "I'll get you fresh water." He left the room, and she exhaled shakily, letting her head fall back onto the pillow. A low groan escaped her lips. Her body felt like it had been beaten with a wagon wheel. Maybe it had. Her memory blurred after the gunshot, after the fight in the alley, after Reed Tucker's men closed in. When Thomas returned, she watched him warily. He offered her the cup with both hands, not trying to touch her. "Go slow," he said. She took it. Her fingers shook. The water hit her throat like medicine, clean and cold and merciful. "You remember your name?" he asked quietly. She hesitated, her lips twitching. "Lena," she rasped. He nodded. "Lena. All right." A shadow passed in the doorway, and a woman entered, older, with long gray braids and a tight mouth. She looked like someone who didn't speak unless it was important. Her name, Lena would later learn, was Auntie Lou, but just now she hovered with a bowl of something warm and a skeptical eye. "I'll feed her," the older woman said. Tomas gave a small nod and stepped back. Lena couldn't stop watching him, though. He was different, calm, unhurried. Not like the men she'd run from. Not like Tucker's hired killers or Silas Blackwood with his smooth lies and empty promises. Still, kindness didn't come without cost. She knew that much. Auntie Lou eased down beside her and began spooning broth toward her lips. It was rabbit seasoned with juniper and wild onion. She didn't know how she could tell, she just knew. "You're lucky he found you," Lou said, not unkindly. "Another night out there and the coyotes would have sniffed you out." Lena swallowed. "Should have let 'em," she whispered. Lou frowned. "Don't say foolish things. You got bones, still willing to fight." Lena winced as she shifted. "My ribs disagree. They'll heal. Rosa bound them herself. She's seen worse." Lena closed her eyes. "I don't remember much. Just that I was running. That much was clear." She finished the broth slowly. Every bite hurt to swallow, but warmth began to spread through her limbs, chasing off the cold that had lived in her bones since the alley, since the betrayal. Lou set the bowl down and brushed her hand against Lena's forehead. She flinched so hard it made her side spasm again. "I don't touch people who ain't mine," Lou said softly, not offended. "But you've got fever still. We'll need to watch that." Lena turned her face away. "Don't trouble yourselves. I'll be gone as soon as I can stand." "Girl," Lou muttered. "You can't even sit without help." She left the room, muttering something about cedar tea. Lena stared at the ceiling. The wood beams above her were carved patterns she didn't recognize, shapes that looked like rivers, snakes, maybe mountains. This house had been here a long time. It smelled like care. When Tomas returned, he stood in the doorway, hat in hand. "You said something last night," he said. Lena stayed silent. "You were half conscious. You mentioned someone named Silas. Said you had a ledger." Her heart dropped. "I didn't mean to pry," he added. "But if someone's hunting you, I need to know what kind of storm you brought to my land." Lena blinked slowly. Her mouth felt dry again. "It's not your problem. You're under my roof. That makes it my problem." She exhaled, eyes closing. "It's not just Silas. There's another. Reed Tucker. He used to be a partner at the bank. When I found out what they were doing..." Her voice broke. "They framed me, tried to silence me, and the ledger I copied everything. Names, amounts. I was going to take it to the marshal. I never made it. They caught me first." Thomas stepped into the room, slow and steady. "Do they know you're alive?" "No. They left me for dead outside the city." "Then we've got time," he said simply. Lena stared at him. "You don't understand. These men, they have reach. They'll come for that ledger and for me. Let 'em try, he said, voice like flint. But first you heal. She didn't know what startled her more, his calm or his certainty. She didn't trust him. Not yet. But for the first time in weeks, maybe longer, she felt the tiniest flicker of something unfamiliar under her skin. It wasn't safety. It was the beginning of it. Her face was inked on paper under the word murderer, but her eyes in that bed told a different truth. The air in town was thick with late summer heat, the kind that clung to your clothes and filled your mouth with dust. Thomas Red Elk guided his gelding slowly down the main street of Alamogordo, nodding now and then to familiar faces. Few folks looked him in the eye for long. He wasn't unfriendly, but he had a way of carrying silence like a second coat. People respected that or feared it. Sometimes both. He tied the gelding near the post office and stepped inside the general store. While the clerk gathered supplies, flour, salt, lamp oil, Thomas scanned the bulletin board tacked to the far wall. Notices fluttered in the breeze from the open door: an auction for mustangs, a missing dog, a wanted man for horse theft. Then he saw her. The drawing was crude, but there was no mistaking the sharpness in the eyes, the shape of the jaw. Even in black ink, she looked haunted. Beneath the sketch block letters screamed, "Wanted for theft and murder, Maria Lena Tenorio, 500 reward, dead or alive." Thomas stared at the poster for a long moment. His jaw worked slightly, but he said nothing. The paper crinkled as he pulled it from the board and folded it into his coat pocket. He paid for his supplies and stepped out into the sunlight, the town suddenly quieter, or maybe just sharper. Faces looked more curious now. He felt it, the shift. Someone would notice he took that paper. Someone always did. Still, he had one more stop. The sheriff's office sat crooked at the end of the street, its door swinging gently on a rusted hinge. Inside, Sheriff Amos Crane leaned back in his chair, boots propped on the desk, chewing on a sliver of jerky and reading yesterday's paper. "Well, look who wandered in," Crane said, not moving. "Thomas Red Elk. You lose some cattle or just come in for the weather?" Thomas didn't smile. "Heard there was a killing in El Paso last week. Banker named Silas Blackwood." Crane scratched his neck. "That's so can't say I'm surprised. Word is the man had more enemies than friends." And a suspect. Crane pulled out the same poster Thomas had already seen. Woman, former bank clerk or something. Supposed to have run off with $6,000. Shot Blackwood clean through the eye, they say. "You seen her?" Thomas asked. "Not yet," Crane said. "But she'll show. Fugitive always slips. They think they can hide in towns like this. We've got word out through most of the territory." Thomas nodded slowly. "That reward money half goes to the man who brings her in. Alive's better, but dead still pays." Thomas's hands stayed by his sides. "And if she's innocent," Crane raised a brow. "Ain't my job to decide that. If the law says she's wanted, that's good enough for me." Thomas left without another word. The ride back to Red Clay Ranch was quiet. The shadows grew longer over the ridges, and the buzz of cicadas hummed through the trees. Tomas kept one hand on the reins and the other inside his coat pocket, his fingers pressed flat against the folded poster like it was burning. When he reached the house, the lanterns were lit inside, casting warm orange light against the darkening sky. Rosa was sweeping the porch. She looked up when he approached. "She's been awake," she said softly. "Didn't eat much." Thomas nodded and went inside. He found Lena sitting up in bed, her back against a pillow. Her skin was pale, but the swelling in her face had gone down, revealing eyes that were sharp despite the pain. "You're back?" she said, her voice dry. "Got you some tea from town," he said, setting the packet on the nightstand. "And this." He reached into his coat and handed her the folded poster. She stared at it for a moment, then opened it with trembling fingers. Her breath hitched. The paper slipped from her hands and fluttered to the floor. "They printed it," she whispered. "They actually did it." "Who?" Thomas asked. She looked at him, her eyes suddenly wet. "Reed Tucker. Silas's partner. He has connections, men in law enforcement, bankers in his pocket. He set this up." Tomas knelt and picked up the poster again, smoothing the creases. "You want to tell me everything?" he asked quietly. "Because if I'm going to keep protecting you, I need more than half-truths." Lena swallowed hard. "I worked for Blackwood's Bank in El Paso for almost 2 years. I was quiet, kept to myself. Then one day the numbers didn't line up. I looked closer. Someone was moving money out of community accounts, ranchers, widows, tribes. Quiet withdrawals disguised as fees. Over months it added up. And you figured it out." I confronted Silas. I thought he'd be ashamed. "Fix it," he laughed. "Told me no one would believe a woman, especially not one with my skin and no husband." Her voice cracked, but she went on. "I started copying the ledgers. Every night after closing, I hid them. I planned to take them to a federal marshal. But Reed Tucker found out. He and Silas argued. I heard them from the back room." She looked away. "Tucker shot Silas. Right there. Then he turned to me and smiled. Said I was going to make a fine scapegoat. He had his men beat me, dumped me outside town. Figured the desert would finish what they started." Thomas didn't speak for a long time. "You still have the ledgers?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "I hid them. In a church. A mission chapel outside Alamogordo, behind the confessional wall. It was the only place I thought they wouldn't look." He looked at her again, really looked. Not just the bruises or the tiredness, but the core of her. She wasn't just scared. She was holding herself together with thread and grit. "I believe you," he said. Her eyes widened. "You do? I've known liars. You're not one." She pressed a hand over her mouth, trying not to cry. He stood and walked to the door. "You rest. We'll go find that ledger soon. Thomas." He turned. "Thank you." He nodded once and stepped into the hall where Rosa waited, arms folded. "You're going to get involved," she said. "I already am." Rosa sighed. "Then we'll need protection prayers. And more bullets." I tucked the truth behind a panel in God's house, thinking it'd be safe. Guess even churches have cracks. Lena shifted in the saddle for the 3rd time, in as many minutes, her ribs reminding her, with every step of the horse, that she was still healing. The air was cooler in the foothills, but her palms were slick against the reins. She hadn't been back to the mission since that night, the night everything had fallen apart. And now she was returning with a stranger who believed her and a man riding behind them whose loyalty she wasn't sure of yet. Elias Red Elk rode with a loose, easy posture behind them, chewing on a twig and humming under his breath. He hadn't said much since they left the ranch, but every now and then his sharp eyes scanned the horizon like he was watching for ghosts. Tomas rode beside her, steady and silent, guiding the way like he always did. No questions, no doubts, just that unshakable quiet that had kept her anchored through the last 2 days. They crested the ridge overlooking the Mission Valley as the sun slid lower, spilling gold across the brush and sandstone walls below. The chapel stood like a stubborn tooth in the dirt, its white plaster cracked bell tower leaning but still standing. A coyote howled in the distance. Lena stiffened. "Almost there," Thomas said softly. She didn't answer. Her mouth was dry. She remembered the footsteps echoing through the stone halls, the smell of blood and gunpowder, Silas's body crumpled near the altar, and the panic that came after when she'd run through the side door, clutching nothing but her own life, and the secret stashed in the confessional wall. The horses picked their way down the slope, hooves crunching over dry brush and loose gravel. When they reached the base, Thomas dismounted first and reached to help her down. She hesitated, then took his hand. Inside the chapel smelled of dust and long-dead incense. Sunlight filtered through the broken stained glass, casting fractured blues and reds onto the worn pews. It felt smaller than she remembered. Or maybe she was just larger now, more filled with fear, memory, and unfinished vengeance. "Over here," she said, voice barely above a whisper. She led them past the altar to the left-hand confessional, the third booth. The wood creaked as she knelt and ran her fingers along the panel near the base, searching for the notch she'd carved with her belt buckle. It was there. Her pulse quickened. She pressed the notch, then pried gently at the wood until the panel shifted inward. She reached inside, heart pounding. Her hand came back empty. "No," she breathed. She reached in again, feeling along the sides into the back. Nothing. The space was hollow and clean, too clean, like someone had already been there. "No, no, no." "What's wrong?" Thomas asked from behind. "It's gone," she whispered. "I hid it right here. The papers, the copies, all of it." Thomas stepped forward, crouching beside her. He reached inside, searched as she had then looked at her eyes, calm but alert. "You're sure this was the place?" "I'm sure," she said, heat rising in her throat. "No one saw me hide it. I came back here after hours. No one knew." "Somebody knew," Elias said, voice low. Footsteps echoed from the entrance. All three turned. A man in a dark suit stood silhouetted in the arched doorway, flanked by two others, one with a shaved head and the dead-eyed look of a gunman, the other tall, lean, with a scar down his neck. All three were armed. The man in the center smiled thinly. He looked older than she remembered, the years on him, like dry leather stretched too far, but she knew him. "Tucker," she said, voice like ash. Reed Tucker stepped inside, hat in hand, holding a leather portfolio under his arm. "Miss Tenorio. My, you're a hard woman to kill." Elias's hand hovered near his pistol. Thomas moved subtly, positioning himself in front of Lena. "Easy now," Tucker said. "No need for dramatics. This is a house of God." "You don't belong in any house of God," Lena snapped. Tucker's smile widened. "And yet here we are." He raised the portfolio and tapped it. "You're looking for this, I assume." How she breathed. "We watched the church," he said. "After your little disappearance, I had men watch every place you might have hidden something valuable. The cathedral, the bank, your old boarding house, and eventually the chapel." He turned slightly so the sun caught the edge of the leather. "You did a fine job documenting things. Precise. Elegant. A shame you didn't make it to the marshal." "Give it back," Thomas said, voice hard. Tucker chuckled. "Now why would I do that?" "Because the law's coming," Thomas said. "And I don't think you want to be here when they arrive." "The law?" Tucker raised a brow. "Which one? The one I paid off? Or the one that's 2 counties over and 6 hours late?" His men shifted subtly their hands near their weapons. "Thing is," Tucker continued, "this ends today. You came back for what's mine. I can't let you leave with it. And I can't risk you telling anyone else what you know." Elias moved like lightning, drawing first, but Tucker's men were ready. The first shot cracked through the chapel, slamming into the wooden beam above Thomas's head. Thomas shoved Lena down behind the pews as bullets tore through the stained glass. Elias fired twice, hitting the man with the scar. He dropped with a grunt. Thomas returned fire, hitting Tucker in the shoulder. The portfolio tumbled to the floor. Tucker screamed, ducking behind the pulpit. "Grab it!" Lena yelled. Thomas vaulted over the pew, snatching the leather case with one hand and dragging Lena up with the other. Blood smeared across the floor, and the air stank of gunpowder and old fear. They ran for the side door. Elias fired one last shot, dropping the second gunman to his knees. He backed out, covering their retreat. Outside, the horses were still tied. They mounted fast, Thomas handing the portfolio to Lena and drawing his rifle as he swung into the saddle. They rode hard dirt, kicking behind them in clouds. Behind Tucker's curses echoed through the mission walls like a curse that refused to die. Lena clutched the portfolio to her chest, heart thudding louder than the hoofbeats. She had the proof again. But now they knew she was alive, and they weren't going to let her get away twice. He didn't need to shoot her, he only needed to burn the pages and let the silence do the rest. The air reeked of sweat and smoke by the time they crossed the arroyo just outside Alamogordo. Lena's hands trembled around the leather case knuckles, white with fear and fire. The three of them rode hard, wind tearing at their clothes, but the echoes of Tucker's gunfire still clung to her skin like a second bruise. Rosa was already waiting at the edge of the cottonwood grove near town, her medicine satchel slung over her shoulder and a rifle leaning against her thigh. She'd heard the shots even from the ranch. Her eyes swept over them as they dismounted, blood dust, torn sleeves, scraped palms. Then her gaze locked on the portfolio. "You got it?" she said, voice low. Lena nodded once, unable to speak. Her throat had closed tight since the moment she saw Tucker's men stalking the chapel. She could still see the flash of gunmetal, the blood blooming on cracked adobe, the look in Tucker's eyes like he wasn't angry, just annoyed she'd survived again. "He'll come for it," Lena said finally. "He already has," Thomas muttered, gripping his shoulder. His shirt was stained where a splinter from the pew had sliced him open. "This doesn't end here." Elias dismounted, last scanning the brush behind them, rifle in hand. "We need to disappear." Rosa gestured for them to follow. "Come, Caleb's place. Basement's hidden. He's been printing under the floorboards since before he could vote." They made their way on foot through narrow back alleys between barns and fencing yards, the shadows swallowing them as the sun dipped behind the rooftops. Smoke curled up from chimneys, mixing with the scent of roasting beans and horse manure. People moved about, unaware that a war, quiet and dirty, had just passed through their town. Caleb Tsosi opened the back door before they knocked. "You were supposed to be ghosts," he said, ushering them in. "Now your bonfire loud." "We didn't plan to stay," Thomas said. Clearly Caleb replied, but his eyes softened when they landed on Lena. "Heard about you. Word's been traveling even without a printing press." "I need to speak," Lena said, holding the case tighter. "Loudly, clearly, before someone else does it for me." Caleb nodded once. "Then come downstairs." His print shop was humble, dusty floors, thick ink smells, tools scattered like bones across worn tables. In the corner, the old press loomed like a sleeping bull. But beneath the trap door in the floor was the secret, a space no bigger than a root cellar lined with old barrels and trunks. Elias closed the door behind them and dragged a crate over it. "Open it," Caleb said. Lena did her fingers stiff. Inside were pages wrapped in oilskin, dry and intact, despite their time in hiding. She unfolded them and spread them across the table. Names, transactions, handwritten notes and corrections, transfers disguised as church tithes, loans taken under false identities. Reed Tucker's signature scrawled over withdrawal orders from accounts belonging to widows and war veterans. "I wanted to bring it to the marshal," she said, "but Tucker got to me first." "You bring this to the wrong man," Caleb replied. "You end up in a ditch again. You need a spotlight." He turned to Thomas. "You know Judge Molina, he's fair," Thomas said. Honest. Then we send these papers to him. But not just that. We tell the town, the territory, everybody. You can't, Lena whispered. Tucker owns half the law west of the Pecos. If you print this, then I finally print something worth dying for. Caleb interrupted, eyes locked with hers. Rosa placed a hand on Lena's shoulder. He's right. Let the fire come. But let it come with witnesses. Lena's breath hitched. He'll burn it all. He doesn't need to kill me, just make the evidence vanish. Caleb laid a thick sheet of press paper on the table and picked up the first page from the ledger. Then let's start multiplying it. The press groaned to life, and within the hour the first batch of pages had been set. Names, amounts, ledgers matched to testimonies. They worked by lantern light, sweat dripping down necks, the clack of the press echoing like drums through the basement. Above, Elias kept watch through a narrow window, his fingers twitching near the trigger of his rifle. The night wore on, heavy and silent, until it wasn't. The explosion hit just before dawn. The back windows of the print shop blew inward as fire leapt through the rafters. Smoke choked the staircase. Caleb swore and dropped the press lever. Elias was already hauling open the trap door. Out the cellar tunnel he barked. They pushed the loose panel behind the barrels aside, revealing a narrow tunnel that led out behind the neighboring stable. One by one they slipped through, Lena clutching the case under her arm, soot stinging her eyes. They emerged into dawn's first light lungs, burning ears ringing. Behind them, the print shop roared with fire. Thomas turned, jaw clenched. Was it Tucker? Caleb asked, coughing. Lena's eyes welled with tears, not from smoke, but from the confirmation. He didn't need to shoot me, she whispered. He only needed to burn the pages and let the silence do the rest. Caleb opened his coat. Inside were folded sheets, pages still warm from the press. I printed fast, he said. Took some upstairs before the fire started. He didn't get everything. Lena stared at him. You saved it. I'm not in the habit of dying for nothing, he said, grimacing. From the distance came the whistle of a train, early morning freight heading east. We've got to move, Rosa said. Before the rest of his men realize we're alive? Thomas nodded. There's a friend of mine, federal circuit judge. He'll be in Cloudcroft within a day or two. Then we head there, Lena said. Elias looked over his shoulder toward the rising smoke. Tucker's going to know he failed, Lena's voice steadied. Good. Let him feel it. She turned toward the road with the leather case tucked to her chest and her hair tangled with soot and wind. The silence Tucker had tried to buy was broken now, and she wasn't about to let it fall quiet again. He already has half the town. The fire was just a warning. The silence comes after. The safe house was nothing more than a shed behind a former trading post tucked deep into the edges of the cottonwood grove. The walls were low, the roof warped, but it was dry and hidden by brush and slope. The group arrived just before midday, after circling the back roads and doubling back twice to make sure they weren't followed. Inside, Rosa spread out blankets and herbs, while Caleb wheezed from smoke exposure, still stubbornly clutching a pouch of scorched documents. Elias stationed himself by the single window rifle slung low, his sharp eyes locked on every flicker of movement beyond the trees. Thomas leaned against the far wall, his face unreadable as always. His shirt was torn at the collar, the dried blood from yesterday's scrape still staining the fabric. He hadn't slept. None of them had. Lena sat in the corner, the leather case in her lap. She'd barely let it out of her sight since they left the chapel. Her fingers traced the edge of the buckle absently, her thoughts far away. The heat of the press fire still lived in her bones. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw flames curling around Caleb's papers, saw the ash raining down on truth before it had a chance to take root. They knew we were coming, she murmured. They knew exactly when to strike. Tucker's got people in this town, Thomas said flatly. Maybe more than we guessed. He already has half the town, Caleb rasped. The fire was just a warning. The silence comes after. Lena turned to him. Then we speak louder. Caleb gave a hollow chuckle. The press is gone. Your voice isn't, Rosa said. She moved across the room, placing a cool cloth on his forehead. You're not done. I might be if I don't rest, he muttered, coughing. Rosa glanced at Thomas. He needs a place to recover. This shed's no good. We're sitting ducks. I've got one more friend, Thomas said. Old tracker from the Mescalero side. Lives up near Bent Creek. No roads. He's kept off every census since he was born. Can he be trusted? Elias asked. Thomas gave a nod. He'd rather kill than lie. That kind of man. Elias didn't smile, but a small glint passed through his expression. Then we go tonight, Rosa said. And while we're hidden, we finish this. Lena looked up. How copies, Rosa answered. You still have the records. We'll make more. Not just for the judge, for everyone. Not all voices need ink and paper. Some travel farther by mouth. Lena's eyes narrowed. You want to spread it through people faster than a fire, Rosa said. And harder to kill. It was Rosa's idea to involve the churchwomen, first Nina's cousin, among them. They met under cover of dark that same night in a quiet room behind the mission kitchen, where soup pots had once been scrubbed, and hymns whispered low between ladles of stew. Now the words were heavier names and numbers passed from Lena's mouth to theirs. These are the families they stole from, Lena said, handing off memorized lists. Some names are widows, some are tribal elders, some are children of the war. The women, hardened by years of labor and loss, didn't flinch. My brother lost his savings last spring, one said. The bank called it a clerical error. My aunt's homestead was foreclosed after one missed payment, another murmured. She'd never missed a thing in 30 years. They copied what they could. Names on scraps of fabric, dates stitched into kerchief hems, pages passed in baskets disguised as bread donations. The records spread through the hands of those no one watched closely. By the next evening, Elias confirmed it. People were whispering. On porches, in stores, at the water pumps, stories blooming like fireweed after a burn. But Tucker was moving too. That night, 2 of the women who'd helped transcribe pages were followed home. Another's brother was beaten in front of the feed store, and a man named Arturo who'd agreed to ride east to deliver a copy to the military courier station never returned. Lena paced the floor of the tracker's hideaway, fists clenched, teeth grinding. I started this, and now people are paying for it. Thomas stood at the edge of the porch, watching the shadows pool between the cottonwoods. You didn't start this. Tucker did. But I lit the match, she whispered. Now the whole town's smoldering. He turned to her. You think the town wasn't already burning? She stopped, her breath catching. They just didn't know it yet, Thomas added. Now they see the smoke. She sat beside him, her body aching, exhaustion biting into her bones. The quiet around them was unnerving. In town there'd been shouts, hooves, whispers. Out here there was only wind in the grass and the occasional creak of old trees leaning toward the stars. You still think the judge will help? She asked. Thomas nodded slowly. If we can reach him. Lena hesitated. You trust him that much. I trust that he doesn't owe Tucker anything. That's more than most men. Rosa came out of the doorway, then arms crossed. We've made enough noise. It's time to deliver the truth to someone who can do something with it. Elias is ready, Thomas asked. She nodded. He left 2 hours ago. He's taking the long route over the ridge, safer than the road. Lena's hand closed over the small copy of the records she kept tucked inside her coat, a backup of the backup pages written in her own hand. She didn't care how tired she was. She would copy them 100 more times if she had to. "You ever been afraid this long?" she asked Thomas softly. He didn't answer right away. "Yes," he finally said. "But I've never had something worth holding on to while I was afraid." Lena's eyes met his, the space between them suddenly charged, not with fear, but with something far more dangerous. Hope. From the tree line, Elias emerged soaked with sweat dust clinging to his boots. "They're coming," he said, breathless. "A dozen men, armed, on horseback, coming fast." Lena stood. How long? An hour? Maybe less. Rosa's face went pale. "We can't fight 12 men," Thomas said. "No," Elias replied, "but we can outsmart them." Lena stepped forward. "Then we don't stay here, we split up. Make it harder to follow the story. Harder to bury it." Caleb, still weak, but standing now, joined them on the porch. "Where will you go?" he asked Lena. She didn't hesitate. "To the judge." Her eyes burned. "With or without a horse, I'll walk if I have to." Elias looked at Thomas. He nodded. "Then we move," Rosa said, grabbing her satchel. The grove shuddered with wind, and in the far distance the sound of hooves broke the silence. But the silence no longer belonged to Tucker. Not anymore. "You've already been tried, Ms. Nighthorse. Now I want to hear the truth from your own mouth while there's still a chance to save this town." Lena's legs ached from the long descent into mesquite dust clinging to her hem and sweat trailing down her neck. But her mind was sharper than it had ever been. The saddle had torn open an old wound on her left thigh, but she barely noticed the pain anymore. Each hoofbeat, each bend in the road, had been fueled by one thought reaching Judge Raymond Delgado before Tucker's men found her. Elias had peeled off 2 hours before doubling back to confuse the trail. Rosa and Caleb were riding toward Santa Fe with copies of the documents, while Thomas and Denny, the old tracker, scattered false paths across the mesa. Lena had the original set in a waterproof wrap tied beneath her skirts. She passed the low, sun-bleached sign for Mesita just after midday. The courthouse stood like a watchtower at the center of town, stone-faced, grim and square beneath the heat. There were no banners, no guards at the steps, only quiet eyes watching from shaded doorways as her horse clopped toward the square. Inside the courthouse, the air turned cool. Lena's boots echoed as she approached the bench. Judge Delgado sat there already, robes open over his vest, a flask of water by his side, spectacles perched low on his nose. His reputation preceded him, stern, incorruptible, an outsider who'd chosen this place not for power, but for peace. He glanced up when she entered, but didn't speak until she stood directly in front of him, trembling. "Miss Nighthorse," he said. Her mouth parted. You know my name." He tapped a file beside him. "I had a marshal bring me what was left of your case. It's thin. Oddly so." She laid the packet of documents on the desk with shaking fingers. "That's because the truth wasn't meant to survive." He studied her for a long moment, then leaned back, eyes narrowing. "You've already been tried, Ms. Nighthorse. Now I want to hear the truth from your own mouth while there's still a chance to save this town." So she told him. From the day she discovered the falsified ledgers in Tucker's office, to the night she overheard Reed Blackwell planning to eliminate Celis, and how she'd been framed for the very crime she tried to stop. She described the fire at the printing press, the women hiding stitched names in handkerchiefs, and the preacher's chapel where she'd bled into the floorboards while Thomas held her hand. She didn't spare herself. She admitted running, staying quiet for too long, not trusting anyone at first. But she told it straight. her voice low but clear. Delgado didn't interrupt. When she finished, the courthouse was still. The judge finally exhaled and removed his spectacles. "I believe you." Lena's knees nearly buckled. "But belief doesn't convict a man," he added. "Evidence does. And right now, you're one woman with one satchel full of papers. They'll say you forged it. Say you lost your mind after Blackwell's death. Say anything they must to stay on top." "Then let the town hear it too," Lena said. "Let everyone see what's in those pages. Let them make their own judgment." Delgado tapped the bench. "There's an assembly tomorrow. Public hearing on land ordinances. Half the county will be there. If you're brave enough to speak, I'll give you the floor." "I'll be there." He looked at her long and hard. "I hope you survive the night." He stood, signaling the meeting was over, and gestured to a bailiff. "Take Ms. Nighthorse to the old holding quarters beneath the jail. She's safer under stone than behind a locked door." Lena nodded, gathered the documents, and followed the bailiff into the courthouse cellar. The room was cold and thick-walled, with a cot in one corner and a tin basin. She sat there alone, clutching her packet of truth, waiting for dawn. Sleep didn't come, but something close to peace did. At first light, the bell in Mesita Square rang clear and sharp. Word had spread overnight. Lena suspected Delgado himself had ensured it would. By the time she stepped into the morning sun, the courthouse square was already filling. Ranchers, traders, school teachers, tribal families, miners from the southern slopes. They all stood shoulder to shoulder, faces drawn, eyes wary. Judge Delgado raised his hand, and the murmurs died. "We have an unexpected petition to hear before today's scheduled ordinances," he announced. "A woman whose story might affect not only her future, but the integrity of this entire county." He nodded toward Lena. She stepped forward, hands shaking, heart hammering. "My name is Lena Nighthorse," she began. "I was accused of killing a man I loved and robbing the very bank I helped build. I was beaten left to die and chased halfway across this territory. But I'm still standing, and I have proof." She raised the pouch and opened it, handing the first set of papers to the bailiff, who passed them to Delgado. The judge began reading aloud itemized accounts showing funds diverted from tribal land credits, widows' pensions, veteran stipends. Handwriting samples comparing Tucker's ledgers to forged banknotes. Names of families who'd lost land under clerical errors. A map showing backdoor land transfers signed by Reed Blackwell weeks before his death. Documents the bank claimed never existed. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone cursed aloud. Lena continued, voice shaking less now. "This wasn't one man's greed. It was a system built to silence. But the silence is breaking. And if I fall, let it be shouting the truth." Delgado lowered the papers, his expression grim. "Mr. Tucker is hereby summoned to appear within 48 hours. In the meantime, I authorize federal review of these records and grant provisional immunity to Ms. Nighthorse until such review is complete." He banged the gavel once. Meeting adjourned. The crowd didn't cheer, didn't clap. They just stood still, letting the weight of it settle. Eyes turned from Lena to the courthouse, then back again. A few stepped forward. Old Mr. Gutierrez from the seed store, a tribal matriarch named Isleen, even Father Ronan from the chapel. One by one, they offered short nods. Not sympathy, something deeper. Solidarity. Lena stepped off the courthouse steps. That's when she saw Thomas at the far edge of the square, leaning against a post, his eyes locked on hers. Dirt on his boots, a fresh scrape down one cheek, but alive. He tipped his hat slowly, and in that moment, Lena understood this wasn't the end. This was the reckoning. "He'll come tonight, Lena." He doesn't wait for courts, he burns what he can't control. The dry hush of dusk fell over Mesita like a final warning. Lanterns flickered in the courthouse windows. Every porch in town bore silent witnesses, ranch wives, elderly veterans, young clerks. Each of them alert, each of them armed in some quiet way, a hammer or a rifle tucked behind a doorway. The weight of Lena's testimony hung in the air. Not yet celebration, not yet grief. Just waiting. Lena stood with her back to the stone column of the old livery barn, the map of land transfers pressed tight against her chest. Her thoughts circled the same questions: would Tucker run? Would he strike? Had Delgado's order done anything except light the fuse? Thomas stepped into view, boots, dusty shirt stained with saddle sweat. His voice was low but urgent. "He'll come tonight, Lena. He doesn't wait for courts, he burns what he can't control." She nodded. "We're ready." But readiness felt like a lie. Caleb had posted himself near the well at the center of town, shotgun across his knees. Rosa stood behind the boarding house curtains with a Henry rifle she'd barely had time to clean. Denny and Elias were perched in the bell tower watching the road east. Judge Delgado had offered to house Lena in the courthouse cellar again, but she'd refused. "This ends in the open," she'd said, "where everyone can see who fires the first shot." So she stayed in the deputy's quarters beside the jail, a place with a single window and line of sight to Main Street. Night fell too fast. By the time the last orange thread of light vanished behind the mesa, the streets were dead silent. Not even a dog barked. Lena sat on the edge of the narrow cot, the revolver Thomas had given her resting cold in her lap. She remembered Celis then. His laugh. The way he used to run the numbers out loud when nervous, tapping each line twice with the same gold pen. She'd hated how safe that had made her feel. Because safety, she now understood, had always been a story men like Tucker wrote to keep others quiet. A sharp knock on the wall made her jump. It was Rosa slipping through the back door. "Thomas says it's time." Lena stood. "You saw them?" Rosa nodded. 3 riders, not flying colors, moving slow. But you don't approach a town with rifles slung like that unless you mean something ugly. The women exited into the alley, flanked by the shadows of 2 boys from town with lanterns. Rosa disappeared into the boarding house again. Lena moved toward the courthouse steps. Delgado was already there, arms crossed, pistol at his side. His deputy, a lean, sharp-eyed man named Cray, held the door. The judge didn't speak, just nodded once. Lena stepped into the square. It felt like walking into the middle of a heartbeat. The riders emerged from the East Road moments later. Tucker led them, flanked by 2 men Lena didn't recognize, hired guns, no doubt their faces blanked, their coats billowing over rifles. He looked older than she remembered, but not weaker. The kind of man who grew harder with time, like a knot in wood. "You made quite the spectacle this morning," he said, reining his horse to a stop in front of her. "I only told the truth," she replied, keeping her voice even. That truth was buried with Reed Blackwell. "I dug it up." He dismounted. His boots hit the ground with a thud that echoed off the walls. The other 2 remained on horseback, hands close to their rifles. "Now why would you do something so foolish?" Tucker said, circling her slightly, "when you could have just disappeared like you were supposed to?" "You tried," she said, "but you left me breathing." He stopped inches away. "A mistake I can still correct." The sound of rifles cocking cracked the air like breaking glass. From rooftops, from windows, from the dark corners of the square, townsfolk stepped into the light, armed, steady, and silent. Tucker turned, expression unreadable. Delgado stepped down from the courthouse porch. "Mr. Tucker, you are under investigation by the federal court for fraud, conspiracy, and attempted murder." I suggest you ride out now and turn yourself in at the Las Vegas Territorial Office before we add obstruction to that list. Tucker laughed once. You think this town can hold me? We're not trying to hold you, Delgado said. We're watching you fall. Tucker's hand twitched toward his coat. Lena didn't hesitate. Her revolver was out before his fingers touched steel. Don't she warned voice sharp. His eyes locked with hers. Rage flared behind them, but there was something else. Calculation. He knew he couldn't win here, not with every gun in town aimed between his shoulder blades. He stepped back slowly. Fine, he spat. You want me to stand trial? I'll see your pretty courtroom. But you'd better pray that judge has more spine than the rest of this piss-poor county. He mounted again. The hired guns turned without a word and followed. The crowd stayed frozen until the riders were specks on the horizon. Only then did anyone move. Lena's knees gave out the moment the tension broke. She sat hard on the edge of the steps, hand over her chest. Heart pounding so loud, it drowned the world. Thomas was beside her in seconds. You did it, he whispered. No, she said. We did. The crowd didn't cheer. They just nodded to each other and went home quiet, slow, deliberate steps into a changed future. Delgado helped Lena up. Tomorrow we begin again. She nodded, but her body already sagged with exhaustion. That night, as she lay in a real bed for the first time in days, Tomas sitting beside her, she didn't dream of revenge or trials or fire. She dreamed of the ranch, of warm cornbread and open windows and the sound of calves in spring. But deep in the back of her mind, one last thought clung to her like a thorn. Tucker wasn't done. Not yet. And unfinished men don't sleep easy. Even under oath, they'd rather call a woman a liar than admit a man like Tucker stole from them all. The courthouse smelled of iron and ink, the wooden beams overhead, still scorched faintly from years of oil lamp smoke. Lena stood beside Judge Delgado at the front of the room, flanked by Thomas on one side and a worn flag on the other. Her hands were steady, but her pulse thudded in her ears as the first of Tucker's victims entered the witness box. They were ranchers, mostly. Some older, some missing teeth or dignity. A few were veterans of land fights, past men who'd sworn they'd never be tricked again. Yet here they were, holding notarized deeds with fake signatures, false survey lines, contracts they never agreed to. The paper trail stretched like a spider web through the dusty record books. But the voices cracked. I signed what I thought was a grazing agreement, said Amos Trujillo, his hands trembling around his hat. Didn't know I deeded over my water rights till I got a summons from Tucker's lawyer. Lena's throat tightened as the murmurs grew in the room. She watched Delgado lean back, taking notes, expression stone still. Did Mr. Tucker inform you of any such deed exchange? No, sir. And did you receive payment for the land? No, sir. Not a penny. Next came a woman, Ruth Benally, strong-shouldered widow, 3 sons in mining. She stood taller than most and looked Tucker in the eye as she testified. He came with men rifles, said I was trespassing, but that was my father's land. Been in our family 3 generations. The title vanished from the county office the day after my husband died. Delgado narrowed his eyes. You filed a formal complaint at the time 3 times. Got silence in return. Or threats. Tucker sat across the courtroom untouched in his fine coat, a legal team of 2 lean men whispering at his side. He didn't fidget, didn't blink. But every time someone mentioned a lost ranch, Lena watched his jaw tense just slightly. Then came the moment everyone braced for. Delgado cleared his throat. Now, Ms. Lena Chino, I ask you to take the stand again and read aloud the letter you claimed was written by Salis Blackwell before his death. Lena walked slowly to the witness box. She removed the letter from her breast pocket like it was scripture. Her fingers unfolded the creased page. The ink had faded, but the words still cut like glass. To whom it may concern. If this is found after my death, let it be known I did not transfer ownership of the ranch to Wyatt Tucker willingly. I was coerced, blackmailed with documents I never saw. I kept quiet for fear of what he'd do to my family. I regret my silence more than I can say. Let this serve as record. Tucker's empire is built on theft, fear, and fraud. I stayed alive by playing dumb. But if Lena finds this, I hope she raises hell. Signed, Celis Blackwell. The room held its breath. One of Tucker's lawyers stood. Your Honor, we object to the admissibility of that letter. No forensic proof, no confirmed signature. Delgado didn't even blink. Overruled. The court accepts it as contextual evidence. The murmurs returned. Then Tucker rose from his bench. I'd like to speak, he said. Delgado raised a brow. You're not on trial yet, Mr. Tucker. That hearing's scheduled for 2 weeks from today. Tucker smiled. Then let this be a preview. He stepped to the center of the room like it was his church. You think I took what didn't belong to me? He asked the crowd. You all want to pretend I'm some villain when I'm the only one who's made this territory worth something. You think railroads come to scrub towns. You think land means anything without power behind it. He turned toward Lena. You want to make me small, he growled, but you don't have the spine to build something yourself. You'd rather whine and cry foul while men like me do the work. Lena didn't flinch. You didn't build. You stole. A beat of silence. Then Rosa stood from the back of the room. Even under oath, they'd rather call a woman a liar than admit a man like Tucker stole from them all. Another woman rose beside her, then another, and then Caleb. Delgado rapped his gavel once. This court respects decorum. But I also respect truth. And this court session is adjourned for today pending formal charges. Tucker laughed as he walked out. Keep dreaming, he said to Lena in passing. You think this town changed. You think they'll risk everything for your little crusade. She said nothing, but as they stepped out into the bright New Mexico sunlight, a boy ran up with a telegram. Thomas caught it and opened it fast. It's from Las Vegas, he said. Federal agents are en route. They'll arrive in 3 days. Rosa grinned. Then he'll run before that. Or he'll try something worse, Lena added. Something final. That night they posted watch again. They double-bolted courthouse doors. And Lena went through every remaining record from the land office, circling every name linked to Tucker's shell companies. One stood out, WR Holdings, a company she hadn't seen before. She flipped through the filings, and there it was. A claim dated just last week, transferring ownership of a vast portion of cattle range north of town, including her grandfather's land. Rosa looked over her shoulder. He's already stealing again. Lena exhaled sharply. He doesn't care about the trial. He's betting he won't have to stay for it. We have 3 days, Thomas said. Then the law is here. Then we'd better make sure there's still something left to protect. Lena answered. Outside, thunder rumbled low and long across the plains. A dust storm was rising. But Lena stood taller than she had in days. This time she wasn't afraid of what was coming. She was ready to meet it. You don't scare me anymore, Tucker. I'm not that girl in the ditch you made sure she died. What's left is mine. The storm rolled in just before dusk, roiling across the plains like a dark wave, thunder shaking windows as if the land itself was bracing. Inside the small adobe courthouse, Lena stood at the center of a makeshift war room, maps, splayed open names, scribbled ledgers, cross-checked. Tomas sat hunched over the radio, trying to catch word from the federal agents still en route. Rosa loaded rounds into the revolver she kept tucked in her satchel. "I don't like it," Rosa muttered, eyes flicking toward the boarded windows. "This isn't a storm to work through. It's one to hide something in." "He'll move tonight," Lena said quietly. "He always hides in noise." Tomas looked up. "You think he'll try to torch something?" "Evidence, no," she answered. "He'll try to torch me." Rosa glanced up, startled, but saw no fear in Lena's face. Just the steady, cold calm that had settled in over the last 2 days, hardening her into something else. The frightened woman in a hospital bed was long gone. This was someone forged. The courthouse phone rang once, short and sharp. Thomas grabbed it. He listened in silence, then cursed under his breath. Warehouse on South Ridge just caught fire. The one storing the contested deeds. Fire crews say it was arson. Lena didn't blink. "He's erasing proof. Half that documentation had no copies," Thomas growled. "He's cutting through the case like dry brush." "Then we don't rely on paper." Lena replied. "We rely on people." She turned to Rosa. "Get Ruth Benally and Amos and Clara from the boarding school. Everyone who signed affidavits. We get them under one roof and keep them safe." And Tucker, Rosa asked. Lena looked out the window as lightning split the sky. "I'll deal with Tucker." That night, the church at the edge of town filled with those who still had reason to fight. Elderly ranchers, battered mothers, orphaned sons, who remembered which men had come to their homes with rifles and forged papers. Tomas secured the exits while Rosa moved among the crowd, checking on each one like a shepherd in a storm. Outside, the streets emptied fast. Wind howled down the alleys. Power flickered, then went dark entirely. And on the edge of the settlement, Wyatt Tucker rode in on horseback, with 2 men behind him, rifles strapped across their backs. He dismounted in front of the courthouse, kicked open the door, and found it empty save for one lantern lit at the center of the main room. A single note was pinned to the desk. "Come alone to the barn where you left me. Let's finish this." Tucker stared at it for a long time, then crushed it in his hand. The barn sat on the edge of Blackwell's former property, now half purchased, through WR Holdings, a shell company, whose roots led straight to Tucker's bank accounts. It had been abandoned for years, splintered and rotting, but it held ghosts. Ghosts Lena had decided she needed to confront. She stood at the center of the dark interior, lit only by the faint glow of a lantern. Rain hammered the roof like gunfire. She heard the door creak before she saw him. Tucker stepped inside, dripping rain revolver at his hip hand close. "I figured you'd hide," he said. "I'm not hiding," she answered. "I'm inviting you. Inviting me to what? To see the woman you made." Tucker's lip curled. "I should have finished it that night." "You did," she said calmly. "The girl in the ditch died. You're looking at what rose in her place." Tucker stepped forward. "And what now? You gonna shoot me?" "Get your revenge like some outlaw preacher. I'm not going to shoot you," she said. "I want you to confess." He laughed. "To what? To everything." "Why would I do that? Because I'm not alone. Not anymore. And you're not feared anymore. You're cornered. The people you tricked, they've spoken. The ones you bribed, they're flipping. And the feds, they're half a mile out and closing in. Your name's already ash in half the counties west of here. All that's left is your voice. Say it, and at least you'll walk out with some part of yourself left." "You think I care about truth," I think she said softly. "You care about power, but power's gone now." He stared at her. Then his hand twitched, but Lena had already moved. She slammed the butt of a lantern pole across his wrist. The revolver clattered to the ground. He lunged for it, but she kicked it away fast and hard, sliding into the shadows. They grappled briefly, the weight of old fury crashing through them. He was bigger, but she was faster, fueled by every broken promise, every bruised rib, every voice that had once begged her not to speak. She slammed his shoulder into a beam and twisted his arm behind his back. The storm outside shrieked. "You don't scare me anymore, Tucker," she whispered. "I'm not that girl in the ditch. You made sure she died. What's left is mine." And in that moment, sirens pierced the night. The barn lit up with the flash of federal vehicles. Agents poured in through the storm rifles raised. Thomas was at the front, with Rosa beside him, drenched but unyielding. "Don't move," one agent barked. Lena stepped back. Tucker didn't resist. He just sagged under the weight of it. The agents cuffed him and read his rights. "You all waited too long," he muttered as they dragged him past Lena. "This town will rot with or without me. We'll see," she replied. As the agents carted Tucker off through the mud, the townspeople gathered from the church lanterns held high. They watched as the man who had haunted them for a decade was taken away, wet, bruised, silent. Lena stood beneath the barn's broken rafters, drenched, heart pounding, but she felt no fear. Only the weight of a long war ending, and the start of something that might finally be called peace. "He's in handcuffs, but the land still whispers his name. If we don't drown it out with truth, it'll rise again." The storm passed by dawn, leaving the earth soaked and quiet, the kind of silence that felt both heavy and hollow. Lena stood by the window of the courthouse, arms crossed, watching as puddles shimmered in the street, and the light from a rising sun bled through broken clouds. The town should have felt free, unburdened after Tucker's arrest. But there was no cheering in the streets, no songs of victory. Only quiet cleanup. Caution. The weight hadn't lifted yet. Rosa entered with 2 cups of coffee, her eyes ringed with exhaustion. They took him to the regional jail in Gallup. He's in a federal cell now under tight watch. "No bail," Lena took the coffee, nodding. "And the agents, they've begun going through everything. Land deeds, financial records, and witness statements. They say there's enough to not only convict him, but to start a review of over 60 fraudulent land transfers across the region." Lena exhaled, the breath shaky. "But it's still paper," she said, "and people don't trust paper anymore." Rosa sat across from her, glancing toward the bulletin board, where copies of maps, contracts, and affidavits hung like patches over old wounds. "We'll need voices," Rosa said, "the kind that can speak over the noise he left behind." That afternoon, a town hall was held inside the community center. Folding chairs filled vast rows of men and women of all ages, packed shoulder to shoulder. Some clutched old deeds in trembling hands, others wore dusty boots and the weary expressions of those who had waited too long for someone else to speak first. Lena stood before them, not as a lawyer, not even as a victim, but as someone who understood the cracks beneath their feet. "I know this room has waited years for someone to listen," she began. "But truth doesn't come from outside anymore. It has to come from in here. You all saw what he did. You all lived under it. And now if you don't speak, his silence will take your place." A murmur moved through the crowd. Then Clara, the boarding school cook, stood slowly. She clutched an envelope with shaking fingers. "He offered to buy my land after my father died," she said. "Said the taxes would eat me alive otherwise. When I refused, my barn caught fire the next week." Heads nodded. "That's not all," muttered someone in the back. Ruth Benally rose her chin high. "He forced my brother to sign over our great-grandfather's grazing land by threatening to cut off the water permit. Said he'd make it impossible to live out there if we didn't sell." The stories unraveled one by one like buried roots finally seeing light. Lena didn't interrupt. She just listened, letting the town give itself back its voice. By the time evening settled, a stack of affidavits lay on the table, each one handwritten, signed in shaking cursive. Truth in ink at last. "He's in handcuffs," Lena said, as the final speaker stepped down, "but the land still whispers his name. If we don't drown it out with truth, it'll rise again." That night, Rosa Thomas and Lena walked back through the streets that had once felt like a cage. Tomorrow, Thomas said, "I take all of this to the regional council. We start petitions to restore land titles, hold emergency reviews." And the day after, Rosa asked. "We keep going," Lena said, "until it's not just about cleaning up what he did, but building something that makes it impossible for another man like him to do it again." They reached Lena's small rented house. The porch light flickered on. As she turned the knob, her eyes caught a strange shimmer near the edge of the steps. A small envelope weighed down with a stone. She picked it up carefully. Inside was a single note: "You took him down. But there's more. And it's deeper. You ready to dig, see?" Her fingers tightened around the paper. "Everything okay?" Thomas asked. She didn't answer immediately. "There's more," she said, finally, voice low. Rosa stepped closer. More. Lena nodded, her gaze distant. What if Tucker wasn't the only one? What if he was just the front for something wider? They stood in silence. The air thick again, not with fear, but with the sense of something unfinished. Lena looked toward the east, where the sun had barely dipped below the hills. Somewhere out there, the next shadow waited. And this time she wasn't the only one watching. Justice wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. If Tucker had roots, we had to dig deeper. The next morning, the town looked calmer than it had in weeks, but Lena's hands trembled as she turned the envelope over again. The note from C hadn't just unsettled her, it had stirred something sharp and unfinished, the way a half-healed scar burns when rain is coming. Across town, Thomas and Rosa met her at the cafe, sitting at the far corner booth, where the windows were fogged from the warmth of early sunlight against the cold glass. They spoke in low tones, nursing mugs of coffee that had long gone lukewarm. "You sure this isn't someone just playing games?" Thomas asked, his voice skeptical but cautious. Lena slid the note across the table. "The handwriting's deliberate. Whoever left this wants me to keep going. Wants us to." Rosa leaned in, her brow furrowed. "If Tucker wasn't the final piece, then we need to know who else was pulling strings. We've only followed what was visible." Thomas exhaled slowly. "All right. What's our next move?" Lena looked out the window, her voice steady. "We go back to the land deeds, the water rights. All the permits he signed off on that led to nothing or worse." Rosa nodded. "And we start asking questions where people stopped answering long ago." They divided the tasks. Thomas would start at the town records office, Rosa would head to the utility board, and Lena would visit the Bureau of Land Management outpost, where Tucker used to hold quiet sway. She wanted to see who else had been signing their name under his. The office smelled of stale air and paper, nothing new. But as Lena flipped through the older ledgers, her fingers stopped on a pattern she hadn't noticed before. 10 parcels, all signed over within the same 6-month window, all in different tribal names. But the notary, the same. Not Tucker. It was Martha Reddick. She was the former county liaison, retired 2 years ago, supposedly due to illness. Lena narrowed her eyes. Martha had been part of every meeting with Tucker. Always smiling. Always silent. Lena made the drive out to Martha's property, tucked behind a row of juniper trees at the end of a dirt road that had turned to soft clay in the rain. The door opened slowly before she could knock. "You came?" Martha said, her voice neither surprised nor warm. I was wondering when someone would. Lena stepped inside. The air was heavy with the scent of cedar and old wool blankets. Boxes lined the living room walls marked with dates and places names Lena recognized. You helped him, Lena said plainly. Martha didn't deny it. I notarized what he brought me. He said it was clean, legal, that families had signed everything of their own will. Lena raised an eyebrow. And you believed that? No, Martha said, her voice dropping. But he had leverage. On me. On my daughter. Medical bills. A mortgage I didn't tell anyone about. I thought it would be just 1 or 2 properties. Then it was 20, 50. I couldn't stop without losing everything. Lena's jaw clenched. People did lose everything. Martha's hands trembled as she reached for a folder on the nearby table. I kept records. Every one. And copies of the checks he gave me. Some of them were from a different account, one that wasn't in his name. She handed over the folder. Lena opened it slowly, her breath hitching at the sight of a company name printed in the corner of the checks, Sundown Holdings, LLC, a name that hadn't come up in the investigation. Yet. Martha met her eyes. He wasn't working alone. That's what I've been trying to tell someone for 2 years. I just didn't have the courage. Back in town, Lena laid the documents out on Rosa's kitchen table. Thomas stared at the checks in silence, then spoke. Sundown Holdings. That's the same group that's been buying up reservation borderland for wind farm projects. Rosa's eyes darkened. They're the ones pushing for private access roads through sacred grazing corridors. Lena tapped the top check. This wasn't about Tucker stealing land to sell off for money. It was to prepare a pipeline of pre-cleared land for these corporations, clean on paper but rotten underneath. Thomas leaned forward. If we can prove Sundown knew the land was acquired through fraud, then we can shut down everything Rosa finished and return those titles to their rightful owners. But to do that, they needed someone on the inside, someone who had seen Sundown's operations up close. Lena made the call just before dusk. The man's voice on the other end was gravelly and cautious. You said you worked security for Sundown 5 years ago, Lena said. Who's asking someone who knows they've been laundering stolen land through Tucker's hands, and someone who can make your non-disclosure null and void in federal court if you help us. There was a long pause. Meet me tomorrow, the voice said. East Trailhead. Come alone. Lena agreed, heart pounding. She hung up, looking at Thomas and Rosa. We're not done. Not yet. Justice wasn't the end, it was only the beginning. If Tucker had roots, we have to dig deeper. They sat in silence, the kind born not of fear, but of purpose. Outside, the wind swept through the bare trees like a whisper of something old, something waiting to be uncovered. And Lena knew the fight ahead would be darker, more dangerous. But it would be theirs. All the way to the roots. The educational lesson learned from this story is that true justice often requires persistence beyond the courtroom. While legal victories are important, healing and restoration demand that we confront the deeper systems and quiet players behind the harm. For older adults who have witnessed the ebb and flow of power over generations, this story reminds us that silence and complicity can be just as damaging as open wrongdoing. But even late in life, courage and community can still unearth truth and create lasting change.